calendar has hardly turned. Winter has tightened its grip on the northern hemisphere, and while most people are caught up in their daily routines, something less noisy, but far more significant, is unfolding far to the north. Right now, policymakers, military planners, and intelligence agencies are staring at a map of the Arctic. Not casually, not academically. They're staring because the map itself may be changing. What was once frozen, distant, and politically stable is no longer any of those things. And at the center of this shift sits a place most people rarely think about: Greenland. This is not a future scenario. This is not speculation. This is happening now. We are only days removed from a geopolitical shock that reverberated far beyond Latin America. The US operation in Venezuela and the capture of Nicolas Maduro. That event on its own would have dominated headlines for months. It signaled a dramatic reassertion of American power in its own hemisphere, a revival of something many believed belonged to history, the Monroe Doctrine. The message was unmistakable. The Western Hemisphere is closed to external interference. But before the dust even settled in Caracas, Washington's attention shifted north, rapidly, decisively, and with very little diplomatic cushioning. On January 5th, almost in the same breath as the Venezuela operation, President Trump publicly stated that the United States needs Greenland, explicitly citing national security. That single statement transformed Greenland overnight. What had once been an abstract geopolitical curiosity suddenly became a flashpoint involving the United States, Europe, China, and Russia. This was no longer rhetorical excess or political theater. It was strategic intent. And for the first time in over a century, serious analysts began asking whether the territorial map of North America might actually change. It's easy to dismiss the idea of acquiring Greenland as absurd. That reaction is understandable. A frozen island, a small population, a remote corner of the world. But history teaches us something important. Moments that reshape the international system often look ridiculous at first glance. What we are witnessing is not a novelty. It is the collision of two eras. On one side, 19th century territorial logic, where control of land equaled security. On the other, 21st century strategic anxiety, driven by technology, supply chains, climate change, and great power rivalry. Greenland sits exactly where those two forces collide. Welcome to New Angle Perspectives. Today, we're unpacking why the world's largest island, home to fewer people than a mid-sized American college stadium, has become central to a new Cold War dynamic, and why it is exposing deep fractures within NATO itself. This is not a partisan argument. This is not moral commentary. This is a strategic analysis. To understand why Greenland matters, we first have to strip away the illusions created by maps. Most people encounter Greenland through the Mercator projection, a distortion that exaggerates its size. But even when corrected, the scale is astonishing. Greenland is larger than Mexico. It is roughly 3 times the size of Texas. It exceeds the combined area of Western Europe. And yet, nearly 80% of this vast landmass lies beneath an ice sheet that can reach almost 2 miles thick. That ice defines everything. Geologically, it acts as a shield. Climatically, it is a ticking time bomb. Politically, it is both a barrier and an invitation. If the ice sheet melted entirely, global sea levels would rise more than 7 meters, reshaping coastlines worldwide. But in geopolitical terms, the ice has historically made Greenland difficult to exploit, difficult to settle, and difficult to defend. As a result, human life has been pushed to the edges. Greenland's population, roughly 56 to 57,000 people, lives almost entirely along the coastline. 88% are Inuit, whose presence on the island stretches back more than 4,500 years. Infrastructure is minimal. There are no roads connecting towns. Travel occurs by boat or aircraft. From a Western perspective, it is an extreme logistical environment, and that environment shapes politics. Greenland is not an independent country, but it is not a colony either. It exists in a political limbo as an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Greenland controls its internal affairs, education, healthcare, policing, and local governance. Denmark controls foreign policy and defense. Most importantly, Denmark controls the money. Every year, Copenhagen sends Greenland a block grant of roughly $600 million. That subsidy accounts for approximately 20 to 25% of Greenland's GDP. It funds government operations, it funds airports, it funds hospitals. Without it, Greenland's economy would collapse almost immediately. This arrangement creates what economists often call a subsidy trap, political autonomy without financial independence. From Denmark's perspective, this is manageable. From Washington's perspective, it is trivial. $600 million is insignificant relative to the US defense budget. It is less than the cost of a single advanced bomber. Which raises an obvious question. Why hasn't the United States simply outbid Denmark? The answer is political, not financial. Until now, Denmark has prevented Washington from engaging Greenland directly. The parent, to use a common metaphor, has refused to let an external power negotiate with the teenager over their allowance. But that barrier is weakening. The ice is melting, and so are the rules. Climate change is the accelerant in this entire equation. As Arctic ice recedes, Greenland is revealing what many analysts describe as a $1 trillion resource base. Yes, oil and gas exist offshore. Estimates range from roughly 17 to 31 billion barrels of oil equivalent. But hydrocarbons are not the core issue. The real prize lies in rare earth elements. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. These materials are not optional. They are foundational to modern technology and modern warfare. Fighter jets, missile guidance systems, electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, none of them exist without rare earths. The vulnerability is not geological, it is geopolitical. China controls approximately 90% of global rare earth processing. That means the United States, and by extension NATO, depends on its primary strategic rival for the materials required to build advanced military systems. This is not merely inefficient, it is a strategic choke point. Greenland offers an escape. Some of the world's largest undeveloped rare earth deposits sit beneath its surface. Control those deposits and the monopoly breaks. Lose them and the monopoly solidifies for decades. But resources alone do not explain the urgency. Even if Greenland contained no minerals at all, it would still matter enormously. Because geography does not negotiate. Militarily, Greenland is not simply a gateway to the Arctic. It is a gatekeeper. During the Cold War, NATO planners focused intensely on the GIU key gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, a natural maritime choke point formed by undersea ridges in the North Atlantic. If adversary submarines passed through that gap, they could threaten the US East Coast and sever supply lines to Europe. That logic never disappeared. Russia's modernization of its submarine fleet has revived it. Control Greenland, and you control the western anchor of that gate. Sonar arrays, patrol aircraft, and monitoring systems stationed there can track nearly everything moving between the Arctic and the Atlantic. And now, climate change adds a commercial dimension. As Arctic routes open, shipping times between Asia and Europe could drop by as much as 40%. Greenland becomes the logistical hub, the toll booth for a new global trade architecture. Just as Gibraltar and the Suez Canal defined imperial power in the 19th century, Greenland defines strategic real estate in the 21st. At the heart of America's Arctic presence sits Pituffik Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base. It is the northernmost U.S. military installation on Earth, located roughly 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Its most critical asset is an advanced early warning radar system capable of detecting ballistic missile launches over the polar route, the shortest path between nuclear powers. In simple terms, this base provides the minutes of warning that make nuclear deterrence possible. Without it, North America would be functionally blind to a first strike until missiles were nearly overhead. Strategists often describe Greenland as an unsinkable aircraft carrier permanently anchored at the top of the world. That description is not metaphorical. The public narrative often suggests that interest in Greenland emerged suddenly or whimsically. That is historically false. American interest in Greenland stretched back more than a century. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward, the architect of the Alaska Purchase, explicitly identified Greenland as necessary to encircle North America. In 1910, the United States discussed exchanging the Philippines for it. In 1946, President Truman offered Denmark $100 million in gold bars. Denmark refused, but could not refuse protection. Since 1951, US forces have operated in Greenland under a defense agreement. In effect, the United States has rented Greenland security for decades. What has changed is not ambition, it is urgency. China describes itself as a near-Arctic state, a claim that is geographically questionable, but politically deliberate. Beijing's strategy is not overt conquest, it is leverage. In 2018, a Chinese state-owned company attempted to finance and build Greenland's international airports. On the surface, this appeared to be a standard infrastructure investment. Washington saw something else: debt leverage, dual-use facilities, permanent access. US pressure forced Denmark to intervene and block the deal, but the damage was done. The episode revealed how close China came to establishing strategic infrastructure in North America. Russia, meanwhile, has remilitarized its Arctic coastline, refurbishing Soviet bases, deploying advanced missile systems, and expanding its nuclear icebreaker fleet. From Washington's perspective, Greenland is no longer defensible through passive arrangements, and that brings us to securitization. Securitization theory, which is developed by the Copenhagen School of International Relations, argues that security is not only about objective threats, it is also about speech. When leaders label something an existential threat, they move it out of normal politics and into emergency logic. Rules bend. Norms break. Exceptional measures become justified. By declaring Greenland a national security necessity, Washington reframes the issue entirely. It is no longer a negotiation. It is survival logic. This is what terrifies Europe. Denmark insists Greenland is not for sale. Europe backs Denmark. But the American argument is brutally realist. Sovereignty without enforcement is hollow. If a state cannot defend territory or prevent adversaries from exploiting it, does sovereignty truly exist? That question cuts to the heart of NATO. The United States guarantees European security, yet now appears willing to coerce a European ally. The alliance's foundational logic begins to strain. At this point, it is tempting to ask a simple question: what happens next? But in geopolitics, outcomes rarely arrive cleanly or quickly. Instead, they unfold through pressure, miscalculation, and incremental shifts that only become obvious in hindsight. When analysts look at Greenland today, three broad scenarios emerge. None of them are comfortable, all of them are plausible, and each reveals something different about the future of sovereignty, alliance politics, and American power. Scenario 1. The status quo, prolonged stability, quiet decay. The first scenario is the least dramatic, and for that reason, the most likely in the short term. Denmark maintains formal sovereignty over Greenland. The annual block grant continues. Diplomatic statements remain polite if strained. Washington applies pressure, but not force. Greenland continues to operate within its current autonomous framework. On paper, nothing changes, but beneath the surface, tensions accumulate. Greenland's economy remains structurally dependent on Danish subsidies. Infrastructure development proceeds slowly. Strategic decisions, particularly around airports, mining, and foreign investment, remain filtered through Copenhagen, frustrating both Nuuk and Washington. Diplomatic friction becomes routine rather than episodic. Greenland pushes for greater autonomy. Denmark pushes back quietly. The United States grows increasingly impatient. This is not an equilibrium, it is inertia. Over time, the status quo becomes less sustainable, not because of a single crisis, but because the strategic environment around Greenland keeps changing while its political framework does not. This scenario preserves stability, but at the cost of relevance. Greenland remains formally sovereign under Denmark, yet increasingly constrained by forces it cannot control. Scenario 2. The Protectorate. Independence with strategic dependence. The second scenario is more subtle, more modern, and far more realistic than outright annexation. Greenland moves toward formal independence from Denmark, but not into strategic isolation. Instead, it enters a compact of free association-style arrangement with the United States, similar to the model used with Palau or the Marshall Islands. In this framework, Greenland becomes a sovereign state in name and domestic governance. It controls its internal affairs, cultural identity, and economic development. Denmark exits its formal role. But defense and foreign policy shift decisively to Washington. The United States guarantees Greenland's security. It controls external defense arrangements. It becomes the primary strategic partner, investor, and diplomatic gatekeeper. From a Greenlandic perspective, this offers something Denmark cannot: economic scale and strategic relevance. American investment could dwarf the Danish block grant. Infrastructure could be modernized rapidly. Rare earth development becomes viable under U.S. protection. From Washington's perspective, this is the ideal outcome. No annexation, no direct takeover, no open rupture with NATO. Greenland becomes functionally integrated into the U.S. security architecture, without violating international norms too visibly. But this scenario comes with a trade-off. Independence in this model is not absolute. It is conditional. Greenland gains freedom from Denmark but accepts strategic dependency on the United States. This is sovereignty with guardrails. Scenario 3. Hard takeover. Security overrides sovereignty. The third scenario is the most disruptive and the one policymakers hope never materializes. It starts with a trigger: a confirmed adversary military presence, a dual-use facility crossing a red line, a credible intelligence assessment that Greenland is about to become strategically compromised. At that point, Washington does not negotiate. It acts. Under this scenario, the United States invokes national security necessity and assumes direct control over Greenland's defense and strategic infrastructure, bypassing Copenhagen entirely. This would not be framed as a conquest. It would be framed as protection. The language would be familiar: emergency measures, alliance security, temporary arrangements, but the effect would be permanent. Denmark's sovereignty would be rendered symbolic. NATO would fracture under the strain. This is not theoretical. It follows the logic of securitization to its extreme conclusion. When an issue is framed as existential, extraordinary measures become justified. The cost would be immense. European trust in the United States would be deeply damaged. NATO's internal cohesion would suffer a generational blow. Greenland would become a strategic asset, secured, but politically destabilized. This scenario solves the security problem by creating an alliance problem. None of these futures is clean. None preserves every value at stake. The status quo preserves sovereignty but weakens agency. The protectorate preserves stability but limits independence. The hard takeover preserves security but destroys trust. And that is the deeper truth of the Greenland question. This is not about ice. It is not about minerals alone. It is not even about territory. It is about how power behaves when geography, technology, and fear converge, and how alliances strain when security logic overwhelms political norms. However, what is the Greenlandic voice? Greenlanders are not pawns. Polls show strong support for eventual independence, but not for becoming an American possession. They seek autonomy, dignity, and opportunity. They are navigating between dependence and dominance, attempting to extract the best possible outcome from competing powers. So, with all said, why does this matter to you? Because Greenland is not just ice, it is the control center of the 21st century Arctic. Whoever controls it will shape supply chains, shipping routes, military balance, and technological dominance for decades. Borders are not finished. History does not stop. As the ice melts, the map is being redrawn. The only question remaining is, who will hold the pen? Thank you for staying with the analysis. I will see you in the next perspective.